Everybody, and welcome to ESO Daily. I am your host, Mystic Raven. All right, guys, so I'm back on PTS this morning, and there's a really good reason I'm going to be doing this episode today, because we actually did trials this weekend. We're still grooming people, and we were talking about setting up workshops for certain players and going over dynamics as far as needed specifications for things like vet trials. And it was kind of interesting because I was like, that's a really good point here. Like how some people want to start getting into swag. What's up? No, well, I'm on PC. I'm on PTS. So I hope everything, can you see me okay? I hope everything's okay as far as the feed. But, one of the major things today I want to go ahead and talk about is group dynamics and sets that affect your group dynamics. So in trial scenarios, back in the day, people generalized the gear in Elder Scrolls. And they would say things like best in slot. Unfortunately, that was never the case because they were never taking a look at what? Group dynamics or, applied effects and how that benefits party. And I was like, Sunder is now becoming the topic, which a lot of people overlooked. I told everybody that was going to happen. Because why? Because I was one of the people bringing that up. You want one person with Sunder. You want one person with Night Mother. I didn't bring up the Night Mother thing, but it's always been known. Oh, it was good, bro. Okay, thanks, Swag. Appreciate it, brother. So one of the major things that I wanted to tell people about was, okay, so we're aware now. Okay, one person with Sunder. Right? Why? Because we want to go ahead reduce target's resistance. Same thing with Night Mother. So we have one person with DPS on Stamina aware Night Mothers. We have one person with typically a DK, Stam DK, with Sunder. Not to say anybody else can't. Morning, Robert. Welcome to the show. Saying that's whatever. So I can't hear anything. Let me try to adjust my headset. I don't know what is going on. Let me check something out real quick here. Making sure that's all good here. For some reason I'm not hearing anything. It says it's good. I mean, yeah, oh, okay. Yo, Mars, what's up? So anyway, so one of the sets, so we're aware Sunder, we're aware of Night Mothers, right? 1 second, guys. Okay, so as I was saying, 1 second. Anyways, as I was saying, okay, so I hear you fine. Okay, sweet, excellent. So let's go in. I'm going to go into supplies. We're going to go down to trial sets, and we're going to discuss this a little further. Okay, so I'm going to go into medium trial sets. So see, we're aware of Sunder Flame, what it's going to go ahead and do. We've discussed this last week. It's going to go ahead and reduce the target's physical resistance. Same thing with Night Mothers, right? So we want one DPS with Night Mothers. We want one person with Sunder Flame. That's going to increase what? Our Stamina's DPS in a group setting. It gives the dynamics of saying, okay, now we can get closer to maximize penetration so we can what? Increase DPS for Stamina users. And so not everybody needs what? Penetrating sets. Right? That's very, 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 very important because when they don't need to spec so much into penetration, they're more dependent as a group to what? Reduce said target's resistance. That allows them to use a different Mundus, spec less points into penetration, and then thus increasing overall DPS. Okay, but now Magicka users have to be a little bit more like aware of their penetrating values, even with concentration. Why? Because they don't have a deduction set that applies what? Spell. So the only thing that they're going to see is that major breach either applied by the Ellie Drain or Pierce. So that's the only way we see the deduction other than the crushers. So there is no minor breach. There's minor fracture, but there's no minor breach we see that's being applied typically in group dynamics. So Magicka users have to be a little bit more aware of their penetrating value number. Now, the major thing for the medium armor sets, and this is why I'm going into this, is dynamics. So a lot of tanks run Alkosh, right? We're aware of that, and we're looking at this, and we're looking at Vicious, I want to say. Okay, so Alkosh, we're aware that a lot of tanks. Now, personally, I still like to run a DPS with this versus, but usually with the 20-second cooldown, we now want to see at least 2 people with this. Why? Because we can offer different synergies to keep the uptime, what, 100%. If you're only relying on one tank or one character to use Alkosh, I mean, I can speculate and go over about who should be wearing what and whatnot. That's irrelevant. So I'm not going to ever tell people how to configure builds or who should be. The only thing about it is we're taking a look at group dynamics. So if we take a look and have 2 people running this set, and then basically using different synergies to proc the said set, we see 10 seconds applied in between. So when the drop off happens, the other person can't go ahead and activate, right, the same synergy, because why? The global cooldown. So there has to be another synergy on the said person or another person running it to go ahead and do what? Keep the uptime 100%. Because of that 10 seconds. So we got a 20-second GCD with a 10-second applied effect. So it's either going to be like 2 different synergies that are going to hit what the said person is going to use it, or 2 people running the set and synergies being applied at different times between global cooldowns to get what? 100% uptime for said effect. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that. We won't get into the scaling as far as the damage or anything like that. But we want to go ahead and try to maximize Alkosh. We want to keep Sunder up, and we want to go ahead and keep Night Mothers up. Very, very important. But then we always have to say, okay, so we have our deduction sets applied in our group party. So now what do we need to do? What do we need to take a look at here? Well, one of these major sets that we're taking a look at is War Machine. War Machine is a great, great set, right? But it still has what? A 10-second applied effect. Now, here's the deal here. It's going to be you and the closest 2 allies. So that's 3 people. Now, I want you guys to do a little bit of math here. I'm going to keep it simple, but we're going to have 3 people affected by this. Now, depending on every encounter, you can't necessarily say where the said effect is going to be applied, right? Because if I have hard stack and I have 12 people gathered up, and there's 4 of us running this, that Major Slayer could very well be reapplied to the same targets or targets that we can't control, like healers or tanks. So we can't control the Major Slayer in where it's going to be applied. But when we're taking a look at situational encounters where we're soft stacked or we're separated as units, like the new Asylum, if we're looking at Asylum, or the 3 boss bots in Halls, this becomes a little bit more defined because now we can do what? Take 3 different groups, separate those groups, right? And now we can only need what? We only need 2 people on each to be running it. And with everybody getting the set effect with 100% uptime based on what? Calling out our rotation, our applied ultimate rotation. So imagine we have 12 people. We separate them in 3 groups, right? Like the boss bots. All of a sudden, we have 4 people, right? 3 people in that party. So when we take away 3 divided by 12 is what? 4 people. So now we have 4 people in each of these 3 groups using the ultimates. All of a sudden, when you have 2 people running this and they're coordinating, this is being applied to your party continuously between their ultimate rotation. So it becomes very, very, very well worth it in that scenario. But once again, when we're on the hard stack, we can't control the distributing, but it's a very powerful set. So War Machine as well as the Light Armor one. Let me go back down. I'm kind of clustered today. I do apologize. Okay. And we're taking a look at the Inventor set. My inventory is full. But Inventors has the same effect, same applied effect. So we have War Machine for medium and the other one for light. Now we're going to also take a look at the Vicious Serpent set. All right, which we know as VO, Vicious Ophidian. So once we've delegated, we can allow what? Some of the extra DPS to use this set for what? Maximizing the configuration how they want. Some people will do, you know, the 5-3. Some people will do the double stack. However you want to do it. But let's say you're double stacked. Now you can go ahead and either you still use War Machine for the Minor Slayer. You can do that. But some people can still use the 5 bonus, what? For sustain. For mobs. For drawing out the mobs. You know, drawing from the mobs for the stamina restore. Which is still another really good, powerful trial set. So one of the other things I always tell people, okay, so if you're going to use a set that's going to be a proc effect, you want to coordinate. Right? So are we, if we are running a set like War Machine, are we all going to blow our drop ultimates at the same time like we were accustomed to in the past? No. Why? Because we're wasting a buff. We're wasting the buff. So all we have to do now is the same thing with the Warhorn uptime. We wait that aggressive Warhorn, we had the 10-second application. Yo, David, what's up? Welcome to the stream. So with the aggressive Warhorn, we have a 10-second applied effect to what? Our critical damage. And then we'll, of course, but we're still in effect, but we go ahead and blow between the, like, you know, with like, you know, 6-7 seconds, we start blowing again. Why? Because we want to go ahead and keep that aggressive, that critical damage up, spiked up. So if we have it, we keep it up before it drops off. That keeps our DPS high, right? Boom, boom, boom. So we don't blow Warhorns at the same time, healers and tanks. We coordinate. The same thing applies with the sets like War Machine. So when you go ahead and you coordinate the ultimates, what you're doing is reapplying the Major Slayer buff to do what? Maximize output. If you blow it all at once, and then all of a sudden everybody's on a what? A downtime for ultimate. So that's a potential buff that everybody loses. So you'd rather see 3 people go ahead and maximize their rotation, and those rotations get spiked up, versus anybody blowing it. Now, some people aren't even using the 5-set ultimates on this. Some people are still running a 5-3 config, where they're still only using the base to get the Minor Slayer. So it becomes a question now, if you're only going to use a 5-3 config, do I want the maximum stamina, or do I want to go ahead and get the critical value, right? And that's going to be based on what? Racial class passives. So somebody like the Stamina Nightblade might not benefit from something like Vicious Ophidian as much. Why? Because they have critical value. So when we take a look at the 2-piece bonus, what we see is that critical value. Where a set like War Machine, they might benefit more from what? The stamina increasing their what? Their base damage, right? And once again, I always tell people are like, well, you know, Redguard's outperforming Khajiit, and this is that. Why? Because the simple fact of it is they're not speccing right. Okay, so if I'm a Khajiit, do I need the extra crit? Well, no, because I get 10%. So even if I'm running a 5-3 config, the War Machine would benefit the Khajiit way better than the Redguard. Why? Because I'm getting the stamina. I'm getting the difference lost. But if I'm Redguard, guess what I don't have? I don't have crit. So something like Vicious Ophidian would be way more appealing because I need that critical value. So that becomes apparent. You have to go ahead and spec to what your needs is, based on character sheet, right? You can't literally sit there and say, it's going to be Redguard 100%. No. And there's like, well, the testing shows because you put them in the same gear. And you cannot afford to do that. It's true that we need to go ahead and we need to apply Night Mother. Somebody has to have the Night Mother. Somebody has to have the Sunder Flame. And in my opinion, personally, I still think somebody needs the 5-piece of Infallible Ether. So we were talking about this set last night. Infallible Mage. Infallible Ether is a very, very, very powerful set. Let me go ahead and delete something. We're going to get into this. Okay, I'm going to destroy that. Okay. 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 Now, the reason why I want to bring this set up is very simple, right? So it's going to offer the critical. It's going to offer, once again, Minor Slayer. It's going to give spell damage. It's going to give another critical. When you have at least one person with this set doing who has a heavy attack build, now it's very special. It's a heavy attack, leans more towards heavy attack. It's going to go ahead and basically give additional damage to the heavy attack, and enemies you deal fully charged heavy attacks are afflicted with minor vulnerability. Now, minor vulnerability can be applied without the set. Not saying it can't, but what it doesn't do is guarantee what? 100% uptime. That's an additional 8% damage at all times, right? Not when said status is applied, but when it's being reapplied. So basically, minor vulnerability. Say if I hit target and everybody's hitting target, minor vulnerability is going to be applied, right? All of a sudden, everybody gets an 8% boost. Boom, boom, boom. Of course, unfortunately, when it drops off, you can't predict when minor vulnerability is going to be reapplied unless somebody's using 5 pieces of infal, always doing the heavy attack. So guess what happens to the set? It keeps reapplying the 8% consistently. So the 8% is always there. It's always apparent. So I'm like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I want one person with infal. Like, I would want one person with Night Mothers. I would want one person with Sunder. I would want one person with this set. I want people with a certain person. Well, at least a player with Alkosh. Why? Because it becomes that apparent. It becomes that impactive that 8% is guaranteed 100% uptime. So at that point, I always tell people, you know, I'm not trying to be elite. I'm not trying to tell people how to play the game. I'm just trying to say if you want to optimize your performance, you want to go ahead and set each player slightly different. Why? Because the group dynamics allows it. Now, we also take a look at buffs, passives, right? Passives are very, very important because every class offers a passive that benefits the party, right? So the passives are a big, big boon to the players, okay? So for us, it's for the DKs, it's the Minor Brutality, right? So whether it's a DK healer, a DK tank, the Minor Brutality becomes very important for your party members because when they activate an Earth Heart ability, they do what? They apply the Minor Brutality, and that increases the weapon damage for stamina users, right? The same thing can be applied to every said class. For sorcerers, it's the Minor Intellect. For the Nightblade, it's the Slayer, the Minor Slayer, and it goes down. It just keeps going down the line, and it's like everybody. You want to try to get as many of the classes in there as possible. Are you working, David? I hope you're having a good day at work, brother. Don't work too hard. Don't work too hard. But I hope you're having a good day, brother. But yeah, this is where it's at. Like trying to say, okay, well, now we have a DK, right? And a lot of people were like, well, we want a DK tank because we're going to offer, you know, that, you know, the Flaming Breath because we're going to get the 8%. Mag DKs do the same thing. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to do it because, you know, the resources are kind of hard to pull. But if you do a heavy attack and you know how to apply dots, it's fine. But so long as somebody's getting that in, that 8% towards flame damage becomes very, very important. So I always tell people, I'm not debating set effects. What I'm saying is, how do you maximize? How do you optimize it? You know, your group's function. You got to go ahead and set everybody slightly different. And that's the way this game's designed. Oh, at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do in a group setting. And that's why you're never going to get a real true balance of the game, because in endgame, each class is going to offer what? Different pros to your party members. right? So I want one of the wardens, right? Whether it be a warden tank, a warden healer, or whatever. Because when they're hitting that Lotus Blossom and they're attacking, guess what that's doing? That's applying the minor toughness, right? So all of a sudden, everybody's getting everybody in the group's getting health spikes up. Does that play an importance for survivability? Of course it does. Okay, Robert, same here, David. Feels like it's going to be a long day. I hope it's not. I hope it's not, guys. But we did a really good job in trials. Like, people are getting prepped, people are getting groomed, and I'm feeling really confident, like, within my one guild, because it's like, okay, we're here, everybody's looking good throughout their rotations, damage is really high, everything's looking good. Now, how do we go ahead and take it to the next level? Okay, well, now we have to start doing workshops to get players groomed for each class to fit each role to go ahead and maximize their performance in group settings. 4-mans, we can go ahead and disengage that, right? So if I'm in a 4-man and say I'm using the Warrior Mundus, right? I don't have to worry about that in a trial. I don't have to have so much penetration because deduction sets are applied. But if I'm in a trial scenario or in a 4-man scenario, I don't want to necessarily have to reconfigure my build over and over again based on what? The missing values, right? So I can pick up something as simple as switching out a sword or an axe for a mace. That's going to give me more penetration. I can change something as simple as taking the warrior and getting the lover mundus. That's apparent on every character of every situation without reconfiguring builds. And that's what's really nice about this game. So you can go ahead and say, okay, well, I'm doing a vet, dungeon, and I have this build. Do I want to go ahead and switch out my gear, which you can do that, right? Switch out your build config. Or do I want to just go ahead and do something as simple as switching out a weapon, a mundus, and then be able to do that content and still keep at optimal numbers? Of course, that would be the easier solution. So at the end of the day, that's all you're trying to do. But when I'm always telling people what I ideally look for, and especially depending on the trial, I'm like, I would prefer at least 4 people with something like War Machine and this, 4 to 6, to be honest with you, and then offset everybody else. Like, as long as the Night Mother's there, the Sunder's there, the Alkosh is there, and as long as the Infal's there. So I'm like, so long as we have those core sets put in our group, then we can now offset the difference with saying, okay, well, we want this person with War Machine. Certain classes are going to have better effects with with the Halls of Fabrication sets. Why? Simple. Sorks get reduction in cost for ultimate cost. Blades build up ultimate faster. So what I want to go ahead and take something like my Stamplar, put them in War Machine versus my Blade. Well, not necessarily. Depends. If I'm a Stamplar rolling Night Mothers, I don't want to have to sacrifice Night Mothers to what? Slot a set that's going to do what? The opposite effect for my party. Sure, it's going to boost up their damage, but if they're needing me to roll Night Mothers, you best believe I got to have that Night Mothers because that's a deduction set and that's DPS loss, right? Because we're not pushing up towards maximum penetration. So that's something we need to do. We need to take a look at when we're in group dynamics. And I tell people when you play organized play, you want to take a look at it as a group unit. You want to say, okay, who has this? Who has that? Spell Power Cure, same thing. We have both healers running Spell Power Cure, but only one needs to run Worm. Why? Because Worm won't stack. Same thing with Evan. It doesn't stack. But when we have one person with it, said effect's going to be applied to entire party. So within the radius. So that's why we want one person with Worm. That's why we want one person with Eben. Those values are put on the entire party, up to 12 people. Spell Power Cure, it isn't, because Spell Power Cure has that unfortunately effect where it's only going to affect X amount of players. Same thing with Powerful Assault. I run Powerful Assault in my group parties. Why? Because everybody's getting that damage. 4 people are getting damage spikes when I'm using Caltrops. So as soon as I throw Caltrops, me and other players around me are getting that boost. It's constantly being reapplied as soon as I reapply the Caltrops. So I tell people I want to use Powerful Assault because it's not just a benefit to me, it's a benefit to my party members. So that's what I'm taking a look at. So I don't always necessarily disagree with the meta. players, I just disagree with their approach some of the times. So because the trial set is still what? A trial set. It's catered to trials. It's catered to applying set effects to your party. Is that going to say it's BIS? Absolutely not, because if I'm running a 5-3 config, I would much rather have agility or willpower because I don't have to wait for Warhorn to maximize DPS output. But if I'm using the set for the bonuses, especially on a switchover or as a proc, then I want to go ahead and optimize towards that end game. And that's where double stacking becomes apparent. So that's why bow dual wield works, because I can control its effect on the back bar where I'm not losing my bonus up front for my DPS if I'm using something like Hundings. So that is really, really nice, and that's what we need to take a look at. So that's pretty much kind of what I wanted to go over. You know, just kind of keep it simple. And, you know, I know a lot of people were like, oh, Mystic this and oh, Mystic that. But I'm like, listen, guys, I'm just trying to help. You know, I mean, take it for what it's worth. I'm a former elitist. I'm not trying to dictate to people or trying to push people in a one way and making people think it has to be this said way. I don't believe that. But I do believe in group optimization. We have to take a look at putting players in certain gear configurations, not to maximize their said DPS, but to maximize group DPS. And that's where we need to go. We have to take a look at that. And I'm so glad that it's being done that way these days. Because when I first got here, everybody was wearing Twiceborn Star running the same Munduses. Didn't matter if you're Magicka or Stamina. Everybody was doing it. Everybody was wearing Sharpen Trait. Now I'm like, you want one person with charge. I won't do it as a healer. I feel like my Sorcerer, when I'm using my Sorcerer, I will use a Charged Lightning Staff. Why? I'm going to keep applying the status effect. So I would rather take a little bit of loss on my Sorc, a little bit, to do what? Impact my group's DPS without compromising my healer's ability to play their role. Hey guys, what can I spend AP on to make some quick gold? I have 300k AP. Well, you can go to the merchant. You can either buy motifs and buy motifs. So you can go to buy Vec and buy some military ornate motifs, or you can go inside a Cyrodiil, go to your PvP vendor depending on which city, and buy Akaviri, and those sell for really good, but they're expensive. They're about, you know, between 100 to 500k for each motif, but they sell for up to like 50, 60, you know, per. So yeah, really nice. The gear pieces are where it's at though. Weapons are cool. Weapons are cool. So, but a lot of people want the gear. So something is, you know, like, you know, hands or gloves will go for 50k. So, or you can gamble it on your PvP vendors and try to get loot and sell that loot, but it's not as much money. The bigger money is where the motifs are. Snoop. But once again, configurations, it's going to be up to your party members who's going to wear what, right? But you got to be open-minded, and you got to say, okay, so long as we have this set, as long as we have that set, as long as we have a set in this set, we're going to be what? Optimizing group functionality. It's not always going to be about your DPS as an individual. It's going to be overall performance for your party, right? That's very, 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 very important. I'm always telling people, someone's like, well, I'm losing DPS now. You are now, because you haven't been put in your group who's doing what? Buffing you as well for the loss that you're occurring. But now what you're doing is buffing them. So we have multiple buffs being applied throughout the mechanics. It's being systematically additive. It's an additive across the board, not individualized. So that's what you want to do. You want to separate individual. No problem, Snoop. Anytime, man. You want to separate individualized performance for what? Group performance. The rotation, if your rotation's clean, you're going to actually spike up everything, same as your overall DPS might suffer, if, like when you're trying to do a test dummy. You might suffer a couple thousand, right? You might say, oh, I'm dealing less, but that's not the point. The point of it is, you're not getting the buffs. You're not getting the powerful assault buff. You're not getting the deducted value set. That's why I always tell people, when I go to a target dummy, And if I'm pulling X amount on a target dummy, is that reflection of what I'm going to be doing in trial? No. Why? Because there's no other people that's offering me the buffs, the innate buffs from the other classes. I'm not getting the other set bonuses that's being applied from party members. I'm not getting the Spell Power Cure. I'm not getting the Major Fracture or Major Breach. All of these are factors. They're controlled factors that need to be taken a look at across the board. So when you take a look at that and you're doing well on a target dummy and all of a sudden you're even doing better now in a group setting, it's because you know your rotation and everybody has said effects applied. So workshop talk, simple, just try to maximize group performance. So when all of a sudden you're like, everybody has clean rotation, how do we optimize? Simple, we get one person Thunder, one person Night Mothers. My opinion, one person in foul, and then, you know, we have the people with Alkosh, however you want to do it. Now we got people with War Machine, we have people with this that's applying this. But if you're going to use a set like War Machine, don't blow all ultimates at once. Stagger your ultimates to do what? Maximize applied effect. Okay? Simple. Just that simple. So once again, guys, I hope this helps people. I just wanted to get on here, talk a little shop, and be like, okay, well, I'm glad. I'm happy. You know, I finally got in here, and I'm telling people, okay, well, you know, crafted sets are really good. They're really strong now. We still see people, you know, running this type of configuration, which is fine, so long as other effects are being applied. So I always tell people, use whatever works for you, but when you're in group dynamics, try to optimize group performance by applying what? Said effects from said sets. Okay? So that's it for me today. If anybody has any questions, comments, please post below. I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the support. And once again and always, have a nice day.